It's funny how we often overlook the simplest things, the things that have always been there.
Right.
Like daylight. We have a fascinating collection of architectural texts on daylighting, and it's clear you're really interested in how natural light impacts our well-being way beyond just, energy bills.
It's something more and more architects are really starting to pay attention to.
Yeah.
This idea that buildings should work with our biology, not against it, And daylight, it's a perfect example of that.
Totally. So let's shed some light on this, shall we? We're going to uncover how daylight has been used throughout history and how modern architects are harnessing its power today.
Yeah.
But first, and this might be surprising to some people, daylight isn't just like a weaker version of electric light. Right?
Absolutely not.
Like, there's got to be more to it.
Daylight, it's dynamic.
Okay.
It changes constantly throughout the day, across the seasons.
Right.
It's not just about how bright a space is, but also the type of light. The actual quality of the light changes, you see.
So our bodies are picking up on these subtle shifts, even if we're not, consciously aware of them.
Exactly. Our circadian rhythms, those internal clocks we all have.
Yeah.
They evolved alongside these natural light patterns, these shifts. So when our eyes detect daylight, especially that blue wavelength that's super strong in the morning sunlight,
right,
it sends a signal to the brain.
Like, wake up.
Exactly. Time to be up and at 'em.
Okay, that explains so much about my mid-afternoon slump if I'm stuck in a, dimly lit office all day.
Exactly. And it's not just about feeling sluggish or sleepy.
Right.
Studies have actually found that office workers with more exposure to daylight, they sleep better at night. And they're more physically active than those stuck in windowless environments.
Wow, just from having more natural light.
It's pretty amazing.
I'm ready to, put in a formal request for that window desk right now.
You and everyone else, right?
Seriously.
Yeah.
So what's the science behind that? How does that work?
Well, when we perceive daylight, it triggers our bodies to produce certain hormones, things like cortisol and serotonin.
Okay.
And those are super important because they regulate our sleep-wake cycles, our mood, even our metabolism.
Oh, wow.
It's like a natural mood booster and an energy drink, but, all natural.
So a lack of daylight, it's almost like we're missing out on a vital nutrient or something.
It's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah.
And speaking of nutrients, one of the biggest things researchers are looking at is the link between daylight and vitamin D.
Right. I was curious about that. I always thought we got vitamin D from food, primarily.
We do get some from our diet, sure, but our bodies are actually designed to make it themselves.
Really?
Yeah, through direct exposure to sunlight.
Huh.
The problem is vitamin D deficiency is surprisingly common these days.
Is it?
Oh yeah, even in sunny places.
That's wild. Okay, so no sunlight, not enough vitamin D. What's the worst that can happen?
Well, studies have linked vitamin D deficiency to a higher risk of some serious health problems like cancer, diabetes, even multiple sclerosis.
Wow, I had no idea.
It makes you think, remember how we talked about architecture being like a second skin?
Yeah.
What if we're unintentionally building ourselves out of a vital health benefit by not considering daylight?
That's a really interesting way to think about it.
Something architects are really starting to grapple with.
It's almost like our built environment could be working against us in this way.
Yeah.
I'm definitely seeing things in a new light. Haha, no pun intended.
Right.
But before we get into how modern buildings are changing, I'm curious about ancient civilizations long before electricity.
Sure.
They didn't have a choice but to rely on daylight, right?
Exactly. For centuries, daylight wasn't an aesthetic choice. It was a necessity.
Right.
And let me tell you, ancient architects, they were masters at using it to their advantage.
I bet.
Give me some examples. Like the ancient Egyptians, their temples and tombs. Yeah. They were meticulously aligned with the sun's path.
Wow.
Imagine the solstices and equinoxes, those key moments in the solar year.
Yeah.
Those structures would be illuminated in these really dramatic ways, just incredible plays of light and shadow.
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't an accident.
It's like they used the light itself as part of their storytelling.
Precisely.
That's amazing. Were there other more practical applications?
Absolutely. The ancient Greeks, they were pioneers of what we now call passive solar design.
Okay.
They understood how the sun's angle changes throughout the year.
Right.
And they used that knowledge to strategically position windows and porticos, these covered walkways, to capture the warmth during the winter months.
All right.
But then also provide shade from that harsh summer sun.
So clever. They worked with nature, not against it.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder what we've lost in our modern world of constant artificial light.
It's a question more and more architects are asking.
Yeah.
There was a period, especially in the mid-20th century, when daylighting took a backseat.
Right. What happened?
It wasn't that daylighting was bad. It's just that other factors came into play.
Like what?
Well, think about it. The rise of fluorescent lighting.
Right.
This huge push for energy efficiency.
Okay, yeah.
Suddenly, we could light these massive buildings cheaply, regardless of where the sun actually hit.
Huh.
And then in the energy crisis of the 1970s,
right.
building codes started prioritizing insulation, often leading to, you guessed it,
smaller windows.
Exactly.
So we became obsessed with conserving energy, which is obviously important, but maybe at the cost of our health and well-being in some ways.
A trade-off, for sure.
And now it seems like there's this renewed interest in daylighting.
Oh, absolutely.
So what changed?
I think a few things happened at once,
Yeah.
We started to really understand the human cost of living and working in these environments starved of natural light.
Like what?
The vitamin D deficiency we talked about, the messed up sleep, all of it,
Right.
And at the same time, technology started catching up to our desire for both natural light and efficiency.
Okay, how so?
We now have glazing, that's the technical term for the glass used in windows, that is both super energy efficient and excellent at transmitting daylight.
Oh, wow, the best of both worlds.
Exactly.
So it's not just offices and schools embracing daylighting now, right?
No, not at all. Hospitals, museums, even airports.
Wow.
They're all realizing the positive effects of natural light.
Interesting. So how do architects design with daylight? What are some of the key techniques they use?
Well, it all starts with really understanding the path of the sun and how to manipulate it.
Okay.
One of the most basic strategies is side lighting.
So strategically placed windows.
Like that.
But it can't be as simple as that, can it?
You're right. It's not just about having windows. It's about their placement, their size, even their shape, the type of glass used.
Okay.
All of these things impact how effectively daylight enters and then spreads throughout a space.
So walk me through it. What makes for good side lighting? What should I look for if I want to know if a space is well designed?
Well, generally speaking, south-facing windows, at least in the northern hemisphere, they're ideal.
Okay.
They're going to capture the most direct sunlight, especially in the winter when the sun hangs lower in the sky.
Makes sense.
Now, east and west facing windows, they can be great.
Yeah.
They let in that beautiful morning and afternoon light.
Right.
But they also come with challenges.
Yeah, like what?
Glare, too much heat at certain times of the year,
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that.
Right. But luckily, architects have some clever ways to mitigate those challenges.
Like what?
Things like overhangs, louvers, light shelves.
Light shelves, what are those?
They're like horizontal surfaces, often placed above windows, that reflect daylight deeper into a room.
Oh, cool.
Even landscaping can be strategically used,
Really?
Yeah, to control the amount and angle of sunlight entering a space.
Huh. So it's like a delicate dance,
It really is.
Maximizing daylight while minimizing its potential downsides.
Exactly.
And speaking of downsides, let's talk about glare for a minute.
Oh, the bane of many an office worker's existence, right?
Tell me about it. That blinding laptop screen glare is the worst.
The worst.
How do architects address that?
So, like we talked about, elements like overhangs and louvers play a huge role.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also diffusing glazing.
Diffusing glazing?
Yeah, it's a special type of glass that scatters the light as it comes through,
Oh, interesting.
Architects also use things like lighter colors on interior surfaces because they reflect light more evenly. And even thinking carefully about furniture placement.
Okay.
You want to minimize that direct glare on work surfaces,
It's like a giant puzzle.
It is.
Making sure all these little pieces fit together just right.
Exactly. And of course, you can't forget about heat gain. That's a big one too, especially in warmer climates.
Right. Too much glass, and you've basically got yourself a greenhouse room.
Yeah.
Which kind of defeats the purpose of energy efficiency.
Exactly. But we have ways of combating that.
Okay, like what?
High-performance glazing is key.
What's that?
It's specially coated glass that reflects infrared radiation, which is what carries most of the heat.
Oh, cool.
Architects also incorporate shading devices.
Right.
And utilize passive cooling techniques like natural ventilation to help regulate the temperature inside.
Fascinating. So it's all about balance.
You could say that. Now, another challenge, and people often overlook this one, is the potential for UV damage.
Oh, that's right. I mean, we need some UV exposure for that vitamin D we were talking about.
Right.
But too much of it isn't good either.
Exactly. It's all about finding that sweet spot.
So how do you protect against that without, like, blocking out all the good stuff?
Again, it comes down to making smart choices, about the materials.
Okay.
Things like UV-resistant glazing, for example.
Makes sense.
Proper shading is really important. And then selecting furniture and fabrics that won't fade or deteriorate with prolonged sun exposure.
It's amazing how much goes into all of this. It seems like the goal is to, really harness the benefits of natural light while also being mindful of its potential downsides.
Exactly.
It's fascinating.
It really is.
And this intricate dance is what's driving this whole movement toward healthier, more sustainable, more inspiring buildings.
I think so, yeah.
And speaking of sustainable, I'm curious, how does daylighting contribute to the larger push for sustainable architecture?
Well, it plays a huge role by significantly cutting down on the need for artificial lighting.
Right.
Less artificial light means lower energy consumption, which is good for the planet, and lower greenhouse gas emissions.
Right, because daylight is basically free energy, right?
Exactly. But it's bigger than just the energy savings.
Okay.
When you design with daylight in mind, you're automatically creating a healthier, more comfortable indoor environment.
Mm.
And that means better productivity, less stress, and enhanced sense of well-being for the people inside these buildings.
It's a win-win for the planet and the people who use the building. I love it. Now, let's get a little technical for a moment. How do architects actually, measure and quantify daylight?
Well, one of the most common metrics they use is called the daylight factor.
The daylight factor.
Yeah. It's basically a ratio that compares the illuminance. That's basically how much light is hitting a surface, that point inside a building, to the illuminance outside, assuming there's a clear sky.
So it tells you how much daylight is actually reaching a specific spot in a room compared to being, directly outside.
You got it. And architects use this to make sure there's enough natural light for different tasks,
Okay.
like reading or working on a computer.
That makes sense.
And there are actually building codes and standards for minimum daylight factors in different types of spaces, like classrooms or offices.
Right. So are there any other metrics besides the daylight factor that architects use?
Yeah, another important one is daylight autonomy.
Daylight autonomy. Good.
This one measures how long a space can be lit by daylight alone without needing to flip on any artificial lights.
So a building with high daylight autonomy, that means lower energy bills, and the people inside are getting all those benefits of natural light for more of the day.
Precisely. It's about working with those natural patterns of light as much as possible.
Wow, we've come a long way from those dark, stuffy buildings of the past.
We really have.
But even with all the advances in technology and design, there's still this issue of, people working long hours indoors.
Right.
And we talked about vitamin D deficiency before.
Yeah.
Could our built environment, in a way, be contributing to a hidden health crisis?
It's definitely something to consider. It is. It's something we have to think about,
Yeah.
How many people are stuck inside offices, factories, places without enough sunlight?
Right. It's a little scary when you think about it.
That makes you wonder.
But before we go too far down that road, I want to hear about how these daylighting ideas are actually being used, in real-world projects, Do you have any examples that really show how architects are putting all of this into practice?
Oh, absolutely. A really cool one is the Adidas Laces building in Germany.
The Laces building?
Yeah, it's like the poster child for using daylight to create an inspiring and sustainable workplace.
Tell me more. That sounds interesting.
So they have the central atrium, right?
Okay.
And it acts like a giant light, just bathes the whole interior in natural light.
That's cool.
But it's not just a hole in the roof.
Right.
This atrium, it's topped with this massive skylight.
Okay.
But they designed it really smartly, you see, with baffles and louvers.
To, control how much light comes in?
Exactly. They're maximizing the daylight while minimizing the glare and the heat gain that you usually get with big skylights.
Smart. Very smart. So it sounds like they really thought about how to make it both functional and aesthetically pleasing.
Oh, for sure. And get this, the architects designed the whole building around this concept.
Really?
Yeah, they strategically placed and sized windows throughout the entire building.
Wow, so they really went all in on this idea.
They did. And the feedback from people who work there has been overwhelmingly positive.
That's awesome. So what are people saying?
They say they feel more energized, more productive, more connected to the outdoors.
That makes sense.
Oh, and get this, the building uses almost 60% less energy than a conventionally designed building of a similar size.
60%, that's incredible.
It's huge.
It really shows how powerful these strategies can be for the environment and the people inside.
Yeah, it's a win-win.
Do you have any other examples that showcase this kind of blend of sustainability and well-being?
Absolutely. There's the Life Sciences building at UC Berkeley.
Okay.
It's LEED Platinum certified, which is, the highest level.
Wow, so they really went above and beyond with the sustainable feature.
Oh yeah, they pulled out all the stops, and daylighting was a core part of that.
I bet. So how did they integrate daylighting into a science building? Those can be pretty complex.
You'd be surprised. Like the Adidas building, they have a unique atrium, and it's got this series of vertical and horizontal skylights that draw natural light into the core of the building.
Cool. But California is no stranger to sunshine.
Right.
How do they prevent it from turning into an oven, especially with all the equipment they probably have running in a science building?
That's where the design gets really interesting.
Okay, tell me.
So, those skylights, they're equipped with, you guessed it, baffles and louvers.
Of course.
Which help control the amount and direction of the sunlight coming in. So they minimize glare, they prevent overheating.
Clever.
But here's the really cool part.
What?
Those same elements, they also create these really beautiful shifting patterns of light and shadow throughout the day.
So it becomes like a design element itself.
Exactly. It's like the building is having a conversation with the sun.
I love that. What about those other sustainable features? What else did they do?
Well, they used high-performance glazing to reflect heat.
Right.
That reduces energy consumption significantly.
Okay.
And get this, they have a system that captures waste heat.
Waste heat? From where?
From a nearby utility tunnel.
No way.
Yeah, and they use it to help heat and cool the building.
That's amazing. Talk about innovative.
Right.
So it sounds like they really thought of everything with that building. Very impressive. But I'm also aware that these are big projects.
Yeah.
Probably with big budgets. What about for someone who wants to bring some of these daylighting principles into, say, their home? Any tips?
Oh, absolutely. You don't need a fancy atrium or anything like that.
Right.
Even simple things can make a huge difference.
Okay, like what?
Well, for one, strategically placing windows to get as much sunlight as possible during the winter months, that's huge. It can dramatically cut down on your reliance on artificial lighting and heating.
Right, like those houses with the big south-facing windows. It just feels so warm and welcoming in the winter, even without the heat on.
Exactly. Or think about something as simple as swapping out heavy drapes for lighter curtains.
Right.
Letting more natural light filter through, even those small changes, can really brighten up a space.
I've also heard that using lighter paint colors can make a difference. Something about reflecting light.
Yes. Lighter colors, they make the surfaces more reflective.
Right.
So the daylight bounces around the room instead of being absorbed by darker walls.
So like a little hack to maximize the brightness.
Exactly.
I like it. Are there any other simple tricks that people might not even realize are connected to daylighting?
Don't underestimate the power of mirrors.
Mirrors.
Yeah, putting them strategically, especially across from windows, can really amplify the natural light.
Oh, that's a good idea.
It makes the space feel bigger, too.
Right.
And this might seem obvious, but even being mindful of your landscaping can make a big difference.
Landscaping? Really? How so?
Well, if you have a ton of overgrown trees and shrubs blocking your windows, that's going to impact how much light gets in.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
A little trimming can go a long way. And on the flip side,
yeah,
planting trees in the right spots can actually give you some nice shade during the summer.
Right.
Reduces heat gain, makes your home more comfortable. It's about working with your surroundings.
Working smarter, not harder, as they say. That's a great reminder. It's not just about the building itself, but how it exists in its environment.
Exactly.
But we've talked a lot about the physical impacts, the environmental impacts. What about the psychological effects of daylight?
Yeah.
Don't you just feel better walking into a bright, sunny room? It's like an instant mood booster.
You're hitting on something really important. It's not just our physical health that's affected by daylight.
Right.
Our mental and emotional well-being are hugely influenced by it, too.
So it's not just me. There's a reason we feel better in natural light.
There's actually a ton of research that supports this. Studies show that exposure to daylight can improve your mood, reduce stress and anxiety, even boost cognitive function.
That's pretty powerful. But why? What's the connection there?
Well, remember our chat about circadian rhythms?
Those internal clocks that control our sleep-wake cycle.
Right. Well, those rhythms also influence our mood, our alertness, even hormone production.
Huh. Interesting.
And when we mess with those rhythms by spending too much time under artificial lights, it can really take a toll on our mental and emotional well-being.
That makes a lot of sense. And it makes the work that these architects are doing seem even more important.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just about aesthetics anymore or even sustainability. It's about creating spaces that are genuinely good for us, you know?
Exactly. Inside and out.
I love it.
It's amazing what a little daylight can do.
It really is. So we're back, and I have to say, after diving into all of this, I'm seeing buildings in a whole new light. Haha.
Right.
No pun intended.
It's amazing what you discover when you really start digging into a topic.
It really is.
We've gone from, like, the science of sunlight to architects almost becoming like light therapists.
I know. It's like they're taking on this responsibility of designing spaces that don't just look good, but actually help us thrive.
The holistic approach.
Totally. And it makes you think about what we were talking about before, you know, how modern buildings, even the nice ones, could be contributing to this widespread vitamin D deficiency.
It's a real concern, especially when you consider how many people spend their days in places without enough natural light.
Right, and it's not just about having windows either, is it? Like, even if you've got a window, it might not be the right kind of light.
Exactly. You just reminded me, standard glass, the kind in most windows, it actually blocks most of the UVB radiation we need to produce vitamin D.
Really?
Yeah, so even if you're sitting by a window all day, you might not be getting what you need.
Wow, that's kind of unsettling.
It is something to think about.
So what do we do? Does everyone need to start taking vitamin D supplements?
Supplements can be helpful, for sure, but there are actually architectural solutions being developed too.
Okay, like what?
Well, some researchers and architects are experimenting with different glazing materials for windows.
Okay.
Ones that allow more of that UVB radiation to pass through.
So like vitamin D windows?
Essentially. It's pretty cutting-edge stuff.
That's amazing. It could totally change the way we design buildings, especially places like schools and hospitals where people are inside for long periods.
Absolutely. Imagine a future where all new buildings come standard with vitamin D windows.
It'd be like a built-in health benefit.
Exactly.
So cool. But besides these special windows, what else can architects do? Are there other ways to make sure people are getting enough sunlight?
Oh, tons. It's not just about the windows themselves, it's about the whole building and how it's situated.
Okay, how so?
Well, for example, they can orient the building to maximize sunlight exposure, right?
Oh.
And then design the layout in a way that encourages movement.
Oh, so people aren't just stuck at their desks all day.
Exactly. Incorporate things like outdoor terraces, create spaces that kind of blur the lines between indoors and outdoors.
So it's like you're designing the building to nudge people towards healthier habits?
Precisely. Think about a workplace where the break room is flooded with natural light, or even something like the restrooms.
Right. People are naturally going to gravitate towards those spaces.
Exactly. Even those subtle design choices can make a difference.
It's amazing how much thought goes into it. Daylighting is about so much more than just making a space pretty, isn't it?
It really is. It's about creating environments that support us on every level. Physically, mentally, even emotionally.
And as we learn more about how light impacts our brains, who knows what's possible?
Exactly. I think we're just scratching the surface.
Well, listeners, that wraps up our deep dive into daylighting. We've covered a lot of ground, from the science behind it to the incredible ways architects are using it to shape our world.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. And we hope this has left you feeling inspired to maybe bring a little more light into your own life.
And don't forget to look up every now and then.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let that sunshine in.